Hi, everyone. We are in a new age group. We are in the age group of early childhood. So, of course, our first chapter will be about physical development. Now, remember, early childhood, depending on the theorist, believes that it begins around 2 or 3 and goes to around the age of 6 or 7. Okay, so what's going on in the brain? Again, I think it's important for us to kind of see this picture, see where things are located, and then we'll come back to that, I believe, in a minute. So, between the ages of 2 and 6, the brain is increasing. It's starting to actually become almost 90% of its adult weight. So, a lot of refining, reshaping, children are really trying to get more specific in their perception, their attention, their language, imagination. And again, they improve in all these areas. Now, I think before we mentioned plasticity, remember when maybe one area of the brain is damaged, another area can take over for that. Well, remember we talked about synaptic pruning, which starts to naturally start occurring as we get older. But as more synaptic pruning is occurring, typically less brain plasticity is able to occur. So our functions start to localize in specific areas of our brain, and the prefrontal cortex is specifically interesting because it's devoted to our executive function or our cognitive abilities. And here again are those areas of the brain. Now, you won't really be tested on the cross section of the human brain, but I think it's important for you to know what are the jobs of those different areas. So the cerebellum, which we see here at the kind of the base of the brain, is about balance and control of body movement. Reticular formation is our alertness and consciousness, and that is again kind of connecting to our brain stem. Hippocampus is our memory and our spatial understanding, and the hippocampus is here, close to the pituitary gland. Amygdala is the inner structure that is our emotions, and the corpus callosum connects the hemispheres. And you see that here. So it connects the executive function of the brain to these other areas. All right. Now, what else is influencing a child's health as they're maybe entering preschool, kindergarten, TK? Well, there's a lot of different things, right, that actually affect our growth. So, the information we're passed from our parents, hereditary information, but also your emotional well being, your sleep habits, nutrition. Um, and then again, if injuries or infectious diseases come up, that of course will affect a child's growth. Now, you see child injuries here. Which gender and which temperament do you think has the most childhood injuries? So, if we think of gender or sex, female or male, well, it's male. And temperament, it's difficult temperament. So, difficult boys tend to have the most injuries. Now, how do we prevent childhood injuries? We have many laws in place, right? Like car um, seats for infants, toddlers, growing children. We have child-resistant caps on things like medications or other household items that are, not safe. Typically, especially nighttime clothes are flame proof for young children. So again, we have many things out there that are trying to prevent injuries. Well, safety seats, I mentioned that, about 27% of US parents don't use them at all. And from those who do, about 40 to 84% use them incorrectly. So I had a pretty eye-opening experience one time where I put the children, I have twins, so I put both seats into the car by myself, and usually my husband had been doing it for me. I went driving, I turned a corner, and I saw both seats tip the exact way that we were turning. So I had to stop and readjust the seats, and it took a lot of physical restraint to get those seats in and secured. So it is an important area that I think we don't really highlight too often. Parents also overestimate their children's knowledge of safety. So they'll think, oh, they're fine. They know not to go in the street. They know not to go near water. They know not, and many children don't know these things. It's just assumption of parents. So, what about unintentional injuries? Those are pretty upsetting, right? Where, again, you didn't mean to, but it resulted in an injury of a child. So, they are the leading cause of child death in industrialized nations like the US, such as, backing over a child with your car or them getting into the pool and, drowning. I mean, these horrible instances. But in order to reduce, we have to supervise, we have to set safety measures. We have to know our child and then eliminate the dangers from the home, right? There's all these things, but be cautious, practice safety, even around animals. You just never know what could happen. So, these are some tips to reducing those injuries. Okay, so if we compare the sexes again here in terms of body growth, we looked at them in infancy and toddlerhood, but now we're starting to see typically towards the end of early childhood, sometimes the boys being a little bit bigger in certain ways than the girls. But looking at these pictures here, they're pretty similar in their development. At this age, children usually gain about 5 to 7 pounds a year and about 2.5 inches of height. Okay, nutrition. This is always fun, where their appetite can become totally unpredictable. Again, that's one of the areas that they can control as a toddler, going into early childhood is I'm not eating that. So they tend to just stick to things that they're comfortable with, but the social environment can really influence their food choices. So if they have older siblings or cousins or people who are you're able to use as a model of eating fruits and vegetables, that's always a great thing. Repeatedly expose them to foods. Have them try it each time. Eventually, they'll start to open up, hopefully, to those food choices. We want to be careful of the climate and pressure around food because, again, that can lead to eating disorders or the opposite of things like obesity. And then again, nutrition choices, poverty plays into that. What are you able to provide your child? Is it primarily processed and high in fat and sugar? Well, those we'll find out, as we get into cognitive development, are typically not the greatest choices for a child's attention. Now, there's deficiencies in children's diets. We notice primarily in proteins like meats, nuts, fish, vegetables. There's many children who refuse to eat meat and refuse to eat vegetables. That's again a primary area of getting protein. So parents have to be um, flexible and creative in their thinking when it comes to food ideas sometimes. Again, many times they're not getting the vitamins and minerals they need. And what's especially concerning is a child who is small in size due to a nutritionally deficient diet. So we'll talk more about things like ADHD in future chapters, but again, there is a connection between a nutritionally deficient diet and attention difficulties, lower test scores, and behavioral issues, specifically hyperactivity and or aggression. So when we see these issues in children, the first thing we want to do is look at their lifestyle. What are they eating? How are they sleeping? What is their exercise? Before we just start treating as a disorder or as an issue that this child could maybe have for the rest of their life. And again, before we introduce medication, let's first start a environmental change and see if that makes the difference. All right, so here's some ideas about encouraging good nutrition. You could pause this and kind of review, but again, offer small portions, keep it pleasant, avoid using it as a reward and punishment. Food can get into a dangerous area when we start to do that. Now, immunizations, interesting topic, right? Because of what's going on in terms of vaccines and all of that right now in our time. Well, immunization has led to a decline in childhood diseases. If you remember when you were a child, you might have had the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella. They found that those three specifically had horrific outcomes with young children. So, if we immunize them as children, we would hopefully not see those occurrences. And again, typically we are not hearing a lot of cases of measles, mumps, or rubella, but we are in terms of not being immunized. So, 20% of infants, toddlers, 17% of preschoolers are not fully immunized. Again, this will be interesting to see how this starts to change or get worse as we're dealing with the vaccine as adults, right? Again, why might that be happening? There was a past association between vaccines and autism, which they found was not true. So again, we need a lot more public education on immunizations. Um, but again, immunizations have led to not seeing polio and all these different things that, again, led to many people dying. All right, and now ending with motor development. So remember, gross motor is the large muscles of the body, gross meaning large. So the feet, the arms, the torso, kind of the major movements of the body. Well, when we're young, it typically starts with single actions. We might be able to throw, we might attempt to catch or steer or swing, but it takes a little time and practice for us to get those combined actions, like being able to ride a bike where we have to not only pedal, but steer and keep our balance. Now, again, it says 5 to 6 year olds, but I have a picture here of probably a child younger than that. And I use this to remind me that when my children were young and we'd go to the baseball field, I would see a really young child just whizzing around on a two-wheel bicycle. And I finally asked his mom, "Oh, is he about 3 or 4?" And she said he was 18 months. So again, practice can really play into how much you're able to utilize those muscles of the body. So changes in throwing, typically young preschoolers just kind of throw it and it goes to the ground. They let go a little bit too low, but older children will do the full swing and typically have better aim. Catching is also fun to watch as children get older. When they're about 2 years old, they just kind of hold their hands out in front of them and that's it. If it doesn't end up there, if it hits them in the head, they're not moving their arms, right? But by age 3, they'll maybe move their hands a little bit more to kind of protect their face. And by ages 5 or 6, they might move or even move their arms to catch the ball. All right, so on Blackboard is a video clip about gross motor development at this age. Now, fine motor is our fine or small body parts, like our fingers. So, the two most common ways that we encourage children and foster their fine motor skills is through self help, like getting dressed, using utensils, tying their shoes, holding pencils, doing all of that, and drawing. So, using those fine muscles to do drawings and shapes and maybe build things with their little fingers. So those are the two most common ways to encourage fine motor development at this age. Here's some pictures. When children are really young, they'll draw kind of just a big circle, the big head, and then the legs and arms kind of stick out of the head. And as they get older, they're able to represent a little bit more in terms of realistic type body shapes. Here's a, a pencil grip. Um, this probably will get you starting to pick up your pencil or your pen and see, okay, how do I actually hold it? So I really use the pressure from my pointer and middle finger to kind of push down on my ring finger. So it's similar to the last one in the right corner, but I feel like I kind of push more on the that finger. I remember it always being told to me I had to do it with just my pointer and my thumb. and that just did not work for me. But as you can see, variations, again, they might hold it like a fist, or it all depends on their comfort, their practice, and the item that they're holding. What about handedness? Have you ever thought about, being left-handed or right-handed? Well, they think it begins, typically you'll start to see it at about a year old and starts to strengthen. 90% of us in Western nations like the US are right-handed. I'm right-handed. They do feel that it's affected by experience. So it could be the position in the uterus. They think many times fetuses are leaning on their left side, and therefore the right becomes a little bit more used even in the womb. It could be practice, again, or even culture. Some cultures encourage one or the other in terms of handedness. Um, in my own family, I have identical twin sons. One of them is left handed, one is right handed. I have a brother who's left handed. And again, they have no developmental issues, or they're actually more likely to excel in verbal and math skills, which is interesting. And you can actually even see a shift in handedness if there's early damage to the left hemisphere of our brain. So, just some information about handedness. And there's a video clip about fine motor on Blackboard. Now, in summary, again, gross motor are things like walking, running, catching, throwing, swinging. Fine motor is self-help and drawing. How do they change over time? Well, here's some ideas for you from the ages of 2 to about 6, how we can see increases and definition in these skills. What about individual differences? I'm sure you grew up knowing there's different body types, right? And typically, the taller, more muscular bodies can move quicker and acquire skills easier of mobility and running fast and jumping and, all the things that come with PE and all those things we need to do, right? Well, what about sex differences? Well, they do see that because of differences in muscle mass, towards the end of early childhood, we start to see boys kind of having an edge in terms of skills of force and power, jumping further, running faster. But girls have an edge in the fine motor skills, and again, maybe due to culture of kind of being encouraged to draw pictures and, be inside while boys are encouraged to be outside. But girls have an edge in the combination of the gross motor skills. They can typically balance and, do dual movements quicker than boys can do. But again, social pressures, are we encouraging girls to stay inside and boys to go outside and to do specific um, sex-related activities? That I think, needs to be re-examined. We need to be encouraging all activities for all children. Now, how do we enhance that development within the classroom? They find that formal lessons really have little impact, so we should give them at least 60 minutes in preschool of unstructured play where they determine the play. Now, again, you can still integrate things like physical development, or I'm sorry, physical education, having them work on certain skills, but daily routines are a great way for fine motor and gross motor development, providing that appropriate space and that fun and positive attitude. All right, so that doesn't apply here, so don't worry about that. And again, maybe on Blackboard, you'll see a little bit more about creating physical activities, integrating both fine and gross motor development. Thank you, and see you guys in the next chapter.